Join the amazing, surprising Missing Witches Coven at patreon.com/missingwitches.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. 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 You must be a witch.
Oh, thanks for being here. It's so, I don't know, Mabon is one that gets me in my bones. I think we live in places where we feel a seasonal change right now. It's like, it's a fall day here. There's red on the leaves. The lake is like blowing with mist in the morning. I begin to feel in my bones the need to like make comfort things and build up stores and prepare myself for the sleeping and the dark season. And so it felt so right to get to reach out to these witches we admire so much. We followed your writing and your classes, your teaching about this intersection between food and magic, food and craft, these places where this knowledge has been stored for thousands of years. And you've both done such exciting work to kind of carry that little flame of that story forward. So we're so honored and excited that you're here.
Thank you so much for having us. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of both Missing Witches and Melissa, so I was almost aghast that anyone would want to hang out with me in this grouping. It seems beyond my wildest dreams. So fantastic.
I'm a fan of you. I'm your fan.
Oh my God. Mutual author love.
I feel the flames of love kindling. It feels so good on a chilly fall morning. Amy, did you want to open us up with a reading? We can.
I do.
Witches.
This is something that Risa and I do all the time, where we get so excited to talk to people that we don't actually say their names or who they are. So we just dive into conversations like we're just friends on the phone, which is great and it feels great. But sometimes, you know, listeners want to know who we're actually talking to. So
we'll get there.
We'll get there. But we do want to welcome Melissa Madara and Sarah Robinson. As Risa said, you know, it's Mabon, it's a harvest festival. So we are talking about kitchen witchery and especially Melissa, we'll get into this with you, a cooking beyond food. All the things that we can cook that aren't necessarily edible, that can be, but aren't necessarily. But I want to open, there's a Mabon section in Sarah's book, Kitchen Witch. And for Mabon, I thought we'd start here. So thank you, Sarah, for this contribution. It is time to relish and celebrate the harvest whilst readying ourselves, storing what we need, and preparing the ground for the winter and the dark to come. The light of the sun in the wheel of the year stands in the west, where the sun sets. This is a time of farewell and gratitude for the summer that has been, enjoying the rewards of labor and respect for the land. Mabon, like its opposite on the wheel, Ostara, is a time of balance. Now, instead of looking to expand outward into summer, we begin drawing inward, preparing ourselves for winter, for the winter to come. So maybe we'll turn first to Sarah and ask like about your particular interaction with Mabon in your kitchen, outside of your kitchen, in your writing, in your world. And also please introduce yourself.
Wonderful, all those things. Firstly, Amy, thank you, that was beautiful. You said that so much better than I ever have, so that's perfect. It's lovely to hear your beautiful voice say the words. I'm an autumn baby. I was born just a few days before Samhain, so September, October really feels like my time. As Risa said, it's that beautiful drawing in and kind of settling, and that beautiful sense of really savoring this opportunity to kind of gather in, you know, the harvest. And sorry, I have a terrible tendency to start talking and then completely forget what the question was. But I'll just go with the idea of the harvest, especially, you know, with the kitchen witch, is this lovely idea of sort of maybe going out and gathering, enjoying the natural world, but then you can kind of bring those things back home. So you can maybe do a little foraging and bring some beautiful, nourishing things back home with you, or you can feel inspired by the things that you see and be reminded by what's happening in nature about what we might kind of mirror in our own energy. So yeah, completely forgotten the question, but hopefully that was something.
I mean, first of all, feel free to forget the question and go off on whatever your brain and your mouth connect on wanting to say. But can you give us an example of this mirroring? Can you talk a little bit about mirroring nature?
Sure. So out in there's allotments just near me. I think it's allotments in America, isn't it? It's, you know, when you have these little patches of growing things.
We usually call them community gardens. But
community gardens. Beautiful, that's actually better.
As a big fan of Coronation Street, I have picked up the word allotment and,
you know what the word allotment
spread it
means.
around to my Canadian friends.
Perfect. So we have these beautiful community gardens around where I live, and it's beautiful to see this kind of transition time of drawing in the harvest that has been grown, and then that being a reminder that we can bring home with us, both to take time to nourish ourselves, because this is a time of change, and change is never necessarily a simple or easy thing. So it's that idea of nourishing ourselves, moving with this slightly different energy of the year, so that, you know, the days, at least here in England, they're getting colder and darker, and the rain is rolling in. So it's that change, that kind of using the cycle of nature to kind of inspire what our change might be, and taking inspiration, I suppose, from this idea of what seeds have we planted, what might we need to tend and nurture and nourish in this time, and how can we physically nourish ourselves by the things we've grown, whether that be a pumpkin or a project or anything that might help us on this journey, and just kind of enjoying each stage of the wheel for what it is, you know, its own special magic, and that change and that difference, and how that can be embraced.
It's perfect. How about Melissa? Do you have any particular connection to the fall equinox?
Not a ton in my personal practice. Also, would you like me to introduce myself?
I totally forgot to do that bit.
We said we forget. Yeah, please introduce yourself.
I was like, what should I do first? Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Madara. My pronouns are they, them. I am tuning in from New York City. I am the co-owner at Catland Books here, so many people probably know me through that. I'm also the author of The Witch's Feast, which is my first book ever, my first cookbook that just got released last year from Watkins. Super pleased about that. I also run a small apothecary called Moon Cult Herbs, where I get to share a lot of my herbal work, which forms a lot of my practice. And I teach at a number of different places throughout the country in the US. You might find me at House Witch, you might find me at Ritual Craft, you might find me at Witch Lab or Catland all the time. So I'm a triple air sign, so I'm always doing a lot. I like to stay in motion, but that's it for about me. As far as Mabon goes, it's not a huge part of my personal practice, because Mabon's a tradition that's pretty much rooted in the British Isles, right? And so much of my kitchen witchcraft stuff is trying to find historical roots for a lot of what we do. And when we look at a lot of the traditions that we now associate with Mabon, those are mostly centered in the last like 200 years. And they're located in the British Isles. So they're actually a really narrow scope of what is practiced. Most of my personal practice is rooted in the Mediterranean, where my family's from. Most of it takes the shape of what looks like ancient Greek religion and magic. But at the same time, we're all experiencing harvest season, at least in the Northern hemispheres, here. And that is a season that's particularly suited to the kitchen witch, right? If we're planting seeds in spring, if spring is the season of the gardener, gardener, then fall is definitely the season of the kitchen witch, when the earth's just coughing up all these useful tools, right? Not necessarily tools, but materia magica, which is what food is to witches, not necessarily to other people, or what food is to kitchen witches, I should say. Really the season where like the knife becomes the magic wand, and where the work is really taking the stuff that we've gotten out of our harvest, what we've grown over the year, and turning it into medicine, into nutrition, into magic, and things that can really sustain us through the next, few months. And it's a season that's suited to particular kinds of magic. In my practice, I feel like everyone relates to this, even if you're not part of the Mabon tradition or traditions that celebrate it. It's a season where there's that potent liminality, where you really feel like you're on the threshold of that death current. You're really seeing a lot of, especially if you're a witch who works with plants and works with the natural world, you're seeing a lot of those allies go underground. And so it's a really like, you're heading into a very lean time. So it's a time for protection magic. It's a time for ancestral worship. It's a time for divination. And I feel like the kitchen witch, because they're so rooted in the hearth, is so naturally suited to a lot of these forms of magic. So fall time is kitchen witch time for me, even though Mabon's not a part of my personal practice.
Right. And I think that's what we love so much about sort of using the celestial patterns as our markers, is that like whether you call it Mabon, whether you strictly are thinking of it in terms of autumn equinox, it's a thing. It's a celestial event that's happening for all
happening
of us,
to all of us, right?
Regardless of what we call it. I do want to put a fine point on the point of year where the knife becomes a magic wand. I just kind of want to underscore that before we
Thank you. Yeah,
move farther away. I mean, Risa did a bunch of writing for our next book about the blade as a magical tool, and I think that really sums it up. It's like, this is the moment where it really becomes a life-sustaining, we can no longer necessarily pick the strawberry and pop it in our mouth.
It's the season to defend yourself and needing to protect yourself, for sure. But also the knife is a tool of getting that nutrition out. So it's not just like the pointy adversarial tool. It's also the thing that helps us, get nutrients out of the earth. Iron is the knife, but it's also the plow that pulls the vegetables up, right? So there's that sort of like two-handed nature to it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. I think the knife makes me feel concretely that double-edgedness of every tool. Like it has the knife edge of every tool in it in the most clear way, that it's our practices and our choices that will determine whether this will be for violence, for protection.
Oh, there's an Ani DeFranco quote about that. I think she says that every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. Yeah. I love that very much. And I feel like the two-handedness is sort of part of the witch archetype too, right? Yes. Which is cure and they curse, they hex and they heal. They do both. And there is no sort of moral constraint on that archetype. That's like part of the archetype, is that they break the boundary of that constraint every time. So yeah, it's cool to see that, at least in the symbols that we're using as well. Yeah, I think it's an important piece of the witch archetype that doesn't get honored enough in the modern world, that double-handedness. Nice to see that present in kitchen witchcraft.
Yeah, so let's dig into this idea of the kitchen witch period. Tell us a little bit about how you came to really be so connected to that part of the witch, to that life of the witch, to that role. Why did you write a book about the witch's feasts? What is it about food and the kitchen and the hearth that for you is here is a source of my magic or something I want to write about?
My answer is probably not going to be what you expect. I like to cook, but that's only part of it. I like to do lots of other things too. I like to paint, but I'm not researching magical painting. You know what I mean? I think what's interesting for me about kitchen witchcraft, first of all, it's incredibly dismissed as a form of magic. When you talk to people about serious forms of magic, no one is talking about kitchen witchcraft. And I think that's because for the bulk of human history, kitchen work has been the work of women. It's been work of the poor. It's been the work of marginalized groups of people whose work doesn't get written down, which makes the research super frustrating, but still possible, because in every culture that eats food, we find kitchen magic, right? So it's still ubiquitous, even though it's very dismissed and very suppressed, for lack of a better word. I don't think intentionally, but I think it's just sort of marginalized and dismissed as something not serious in the way that like ritual magic can be considered serious. And whenever I see that, that makes me want to go deeper. I'm like, what are we not looking at here? And the more I got into it, the more I realized like there is something substantive here and no one's looking at it. How frustrating is that? And so that's why I wrote the book, because I was like, more people need to look at this. And this is the stuff that, you know, when I was looking up kitchen witchcraft years ago, that I wanted to find. There's a lot of, we'll talk about modern witchcraft, kitchen witchcraft books and all that in a little bit. But I think the other thing that's interesting about cooking is you get a chance to interact with the non-physical world, by which I mean to say you get to interact with chemistry, you get to interact with molecular stuff in a way that you don't really have access to in, you know, your normal life. And if you're paying attention to it, it can be really interesting to watch this sort of transformation of the ingredients and watch them change from something gross into something delicious, you know? So much of magical work works that way. And I feel like cooking and magic both originate from the generative part of the mind. So they operate within a similar channel, and they both operate on manipulating the hidden world, the occulted world. And so there's this like similarity of technology between the two. And that's what makes it really interesting for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into a little bit of interaction between the two of you and your works. I want to read something, Melissa, from your book. And then Sarah, I would like for you to respond to it, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
Right, I try and hold it in my mind because
Yes.
I'm an air sign as well. And honestly, I can't hold a question. You know, I can't hold things in my head at all. So I'll try and listen, and I'll make a note and try and come up with something sensible.
Pick a single word and focus on it if you like. I'm sure there will be something in here that you will absolutely like soul relate to. So this is from Melissa's book. I've always had a keen interest in chemistry and science as methods for understanding the invisible world, the unseen, microscopic machinations of reality, which are hidden from all experience and yet influence every aspect of our entire lives. From the beginning, cooking captivated me in this way, offering an opportunity for tactile engagement with the mysteries of chemical flux and the transformative power of fire, avenues of exploration which are too often denied to young femmes like myself. But more than the metamorphic possibility of transforming ingredients into delicious dishes, it was the playful and somatic nature of cooking that placed my early practice on the powerful liminal ground between science, magic, and art.
So beautiful. I'm a huge fan of Melissa's book. So here it's just, I love that book. Yeah. Pause and take a breath.
Thank you.
Certainly the element of fire is so present within this world of the kitchen and the hearth fire. And there's that, again, that beautiful dual or in fact, many more faceted nature of fire that it can kind of draw us in, and we're kind of comforted by it, but it's powerful. There's a danger, there's a sense that you'll get drawn in and transformed into something completely new in this kind of alchemical way, which is enchanting and captivating and features a lot in, you know, various fairy and folk tales, that idea of the fire, and particularly the fire in the kind of the hands of the witch. You know, that's when she's gonna draw you in, and it might be that you come out transformed, it might be that you come out as her dinner, but such is the wonder. You know, it's the multifaceted element of the fire, I suppose, is very much like the witch. They are so many things that it's why they are so constantly amazing to us, I think, is that treat them with disrespect and you might end up as dinner. Or you might learn something really important or be completely transformed.
Let's talk about the cauldron. Let's talk about, Sarah, one of the things I love in your book is these sort of journeys into the folk tales and into the goddesses and the trickster figures that are associated with with the kitchen or the tools of the kitchen. Can you tell us some of those that come to mind around the cauldron? And then let's do like Leonora Carrington's narrator does in The Hearing Trumpet and crawl inside.
Crawl inside. So, sorry, to go back like 25 minutes when I was supposed to say this. My name is Sarah, and I wrote a book called Kitchen Witch, Food, Folklore, and Fairy Tale. And it's an honor to be here. I'm a huge fan of both the Missing Witches book and Melissa's Witches Feast. So apologies for just jumping back in time to get that in first. And now leaping forwards to the cauldron, and again the many symbols of the cauldron, and one of the many joys of exploring the history of the kitchen in the book was going back to some amazing stories of I think of the Himton and Kazi that I kind of put near the beginning of the book, which is in ancient Mesopotamia, the priestesses would circle around these great cauldrons and brew beer. And it was this kind of amazing, both magical and completely mundane thing that happened every day. Everybody drank beer. It was both nourishment and liquid. And it was just this very everyday kind of magic. And that idea of kind of these women standing over the cauldron, I mean, isn't that an image that's just so powerful? It's traveled through just centuries, stories, folk, fairy, superstition, all kinds of tales, and, obviously filtered into what you might call the real world as well through history and stories from the witch hunts as well. So that amazing power of this image still of people kind of hovering over the cauldron, and just the amazing potential is always fascinating. I can see a couple of mugs that are cauldron shaped as well. So, I mean, we're still here circling around cauldrons as we speak. So isn't that beautiful? So yeah, from ancient Mesopotamia through to the medieval English alewives. Again, we're back with beer, which is always interesting. So the alewives, Shakespeare saw the women around the cauldron, the hubble bubble, telling Macbeth what's what. And it's just an image that is so powerful. It's kind of just permeated so much, which is fascinating. And yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's so scary to me in a way that this core practice of feeding our communities, gathering our people, feeding them, using our knowledge to ferment, to store, to nourish, and to keep our secrets about how we understand the land, that so often makes us a target. That it's this very act of gathering and feeding that is seen as seditious or dangerous or dangerous.
We spoke of that kind of duality of things, and it's that everything that was done in the kitchen, the feeding, the fueling, the nourishing, the caring for infants, it all got just flipped on its head, didn't it? Feeding the community in a cauldron became brewing, malevolent magic. Caring for infants became killing babies and eating them and, smearing their blood so that we can fly. And, everything just got twisted in that strangest kind of way. And just that it's part of that whole story of these things being devalued or undervalued or twisted into things that they were never intended to be, that is both fascinating and horrifying, and again there's that strange double edge of things being distorted.
Yeah. Melissa, you're in the United States where that twisting is happening in a different way than in Canada and the UK. How do you feel about that these days.
What twisting do you mean specifically?
The way that women and queer people and trans people become the enemy, or become held up in a Christian language as witches. You know, the way that our uniqueness and our magic and our refusal to be a part of an existing system makes us targets again and again. And how do we survive and resist? And can the kitchen help us? It's a huge question. Take us there, Melissa.
I'm going to come up with the answer that fixes it. Well, here's what I'll say. If
anybody could do it, it's you. So take this big fucking question.
Okay. Here's what I'll say. It's been the same technology used to suppress people again and again and again. What we're looking at is someone who's outside the dominant, social class or social grouping, has knowledge which is essential for the survival of the community. Whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about the knowledge of how to relate, whether we're talking about the knowledge of the knowledge to know yourself enough to know who you are and what you want is actually very radical in the society that tells you you're only allowed to be a couple of things. And so, it's because it's essential to society that it gets attacked, but it's because it's essential to society that it will never actually be snuffed out. Any attempts to suppress the queer, the magical, the feminine, all that stuff doesn't actually succeed in eradicating much, because these things are actually so important to upholding society, to making people happy, that they don't go anywhere. So all the attempts to squash it, just remember that they're futile. All these years, women haven't gone anywhere. All these years, queer people haven't gone anywhere. You go underground like the mycelium of a mushroom, but you're still there. And so it doesn't actually feel in my world like we have this tension. You know what I mean? I live in a world where queer people are centered, where trans people are centered, where women's voices are centered and all that stuff. And it's just, it doesn't feel that way. In the America that I live in, it doesn't feel that way. It really feels like I'm in an area where there's a lot of mushrooms, to go back to the mycelial, metaphor. I'm in an area where there's a lot of people above the ground, and that is a good thing. I never worry that it's gone. I'm just really, really pleased to be where the mushrooms are, if that makes sense.
It does. And, we recently spoke to Ayalosa Akalatunde, who said the same thing. Like, they've been trying for thousands of years and we're still here. So
bless them for trying.
Don't worry. Yeah, don't worry too much about it. I do want to go back to this sort of notion of misunderstanding that I think demonizes witches a lot. Sarah, you mentioned Macbeth's witches, and one of the lines there is "Eye of Newt," and so you think of witches harvesting eyes from lizards or whatever, and it's horrifying and grotesque. But Eye of Newt is like mustard seed. So it's people will say you're this because you used Eye of Newt in your spell or in your cauldron, but it's just friggin' mustard seed. And to me, that's so much of what witchcraft is. It's oh, you're a witch. It's yeah, I just I stir my pot in the direction that I want. There's not that much danger to it, except for this, which I had to look it up because it's from the Portland chapter of WITCH, so Witch PDX, and their manifesto says a single witch is a dangerous outlier. A coven is a force to be reckoned with. An international circle of witches is unstoppable. And I think that that's the scary thing about the gathering, is the gathering. When there's more than one witch, the more witches there are around a cauldron, the scarier it is for those who would like to keep the status quo in place. So yeah, I think that that's what's terrifying to the status quo, is not the gathering of witches, but the gathering period, the gathering of dissidents, the knowing that when we work together, we're stronger than when we're working separately. Does anyone want to talk to the kitchen as the meeting place? We think the living room maybe is, but we always end up in the kitchen. Everybody who's ever been to a party knows that we always end up in the kitchen. So can we talk about gathering and being a dangerous force to be reckoned with while we're doing these domestic, I'm using scare quotes here, sort of domestic tasks?
I'm going to be super short because I do have something to say on this one. I love the way that you put this, that it doesn't matter what the witches are doing around the cauldron. Doesn't matter what you're brewing. You're terrifying just by virtue of being there. So, okay, so what's scary about that, right? It doesn't matter what we're doing. We could be making flower crowns, but what's scary about that is the knowledge that's in the brain. It's what we possess in a hidden sense that makes us scary. That's why the cauldron's also terrifying, because that's also another occulted thing. You never know what's in the cauldron. It's just bubbling and you're hoping it's a good thing in there and there's just someone stirring. What's terrifying is not what could possibly be in the cauldron. It's the knowledge that person possesses. The cauldron largely exists as a symbol for a lot of us in the modern world. You don't have a cauldron, you don't have a cauldron, I don't have a cauldron. And so it exists as a subconscious symbol for us. And I think what that symbolizes for us as witches is the hiddenness of the knowledge that we possess. You mentioned the Eye of Newt thing, like that comes from the PGM, right? From ancient Greek stuff. A lot of times in the PGM documents, they would write the names of their herbs in these hidden herbal codes. This exists as a fence. The purpose for this is to keep people who are not part of the in-group from being able to read the documents. And whenever you have knowledge that is, again, essential to the running of the community, but you're not sharing it with the people in socio-political power, you're a threat. You're basically someone who possesses like top secret information and isn't giving it up. And that is, for a bulk of human history, the only power that women and the poor had was, I can take care of myself, I can take care of the community, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it. And so it is the part of us that gets demonized. It's also our strength. It's also our ace card that we can play anytime against the oppressor, right? So that's an important thing, I think, to note. Just wanted to touch on that quick.
Yeah, beautifully said. Absolutely. It's that idea that those in power love to demonize the very thing that, you know, terrifies them so much, which is the power of, you know, the other, the hidden, the kind of the downtrodden. And just, you know, whenever looking back into the kind of the history of witchcraft, it's like just any book ever that was written probably by a man about witchcraft, just take it with just the most huge pinch of salt, because it's just all just basically complete crap. But it's, you know, it tells us something about what they thought and how they saw and feared these people and these women. But yeah, it's always fascinating, you know, even now, you know, when you talk about the stories of witches, people, they think of the cauldrons, they think of the flying on broomsticks and things, and it's fascinating to see the stories and the fears that have endured for various reasons.
Yes, I love that you brought up the grain of salt too, because Melissa, maybe you could speak to this. This is an ancient a Latin saying that it comes from cum granis salvis. So we've been saying, like, take it with a grain of salt for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And again, this is like this symbolic act. It's food, but we're not talking about food. We're not talking about like actually putting salt in a book before you read it or something like that. But this notion of flavoring things differently so that we interpret them differently. I love it. I don't have a question attached to that. I just got really excited about this notion of adding salt to things metaphorically to like be cautious and maybe like, you know, keep your critical awareness with you.
Yeah, be mindful it's going to be imperfect when it arrives to you is kind of how I think of the salt thing. And I like that it kind of infers that truth isn't static, right? That truth isn't one thing, and that even partially diluted, it can still be useful to us. So much of your book, Sarah, is the mythology and the folklore. And even though that stuff is not like literally true, it is still incredibly valuable. So much of witchcraft and the witch archetype exists within that, like that storytelling place between true and untrue. And so I like that part of the take it with a grain of salt too. Yeah.
I like too that both in folk stories and in recipes, these are places where we hide in plain sight, right? We put our knowledge into places where we can kind of slip below the radar a little bit. With that in mind, can we talk about recipes? Can we talk about like things we make or can make or ways we can make that maybe gather people or that help our own transmutations at this time? What are recipes you do that make you feel your magic?
And before you answer that, I want to just mention a tweet I read recently where the person was like, my most prized possession is my grandmother's handwritten collection of recipes. They are terrible. I love this notion of like whether the recipes are good or not. It's like it's part of your history. You know, we maybe all make our, you know, spaghetti sauce the way our mom made it, whether that's right or good, even whether it even tastes good. So back to Risa's question, but also with this mind of like keeping our histories and our genealogies through this method of cooking.
I think, you know, following any recipe that has been passed to you, whether it be from family or friends, you know, that is an ancestor magic in itself. So whether the recipe is rubbish or whether you follow it exactly, it's already something to be passed on, a recipe, and that it's a story in a sense, you know, so that story has been passed on, which is beautiful. And for me personally, I am absolutely shocking at following recipes. I've never managed to follow a recipe precisely. But I'm okay with that. I have accepted such a thing. But for me, it's the magic of bringing people together. So I come from a long line of feeders. That's just what we do. You know, we want to make sure everyone is very well fed. So for me, it's the magic of just bringing people around a kitchen table and the kind of a little bit of the kind of the history of that, I suppose, like celebrating, reminiscing, telling the stories, remembering people. So recipes can be awesome, but also they don't have to be the whole of the magic.
For me, for my autumn equinox ritual, I think I don't know if I say this in the book specifically, because I do talk about my autumn equinox rituals there. I've got one specific recipe that I think is useful for sharing that other people might like. One of the things that I do for the autumn equinox, again, because I don't really celebrate Mabon in the traditional way, is I do so much magical work involving the forest that's near where I live. I live in New York City, but there's actually old growth forest like a block from my house. So I'm in like the best part of the city for witches to be in. And I'll never tell you where that is because I don't want anyone to find out. But so much of my work is walking through the woods and engaging with the spirits that are there, the spirits of the land. And I'm about to enter into the time of the year when they all go away. And they all go underground, which is what that they do. That's the lives that they live. And I'm stuck here by myself and it sucks. So fall time and the autumn equinox is kind of like one of my last chances to get out there and make my offerings and to really be among those spirits while they're in like the last bits of their potency and their power when they're really available. They're probably gone like after Halloween, you know, once like the earth is really cold. And so I have a recipe in my book for, they're like little apple cheddar rosemary hand pies. They're so easy to make. And I was thinking about offerings that are like traditionally always accepted. Like when you look at different time periods, apples are usually always good because they're very nutritionally beneficial. They're delicious. And it's generally believed that spirits like stuff that we like. Rosemary is also a plant that I've never seen it recorded to have a negative use. It's one of those plants that's so medicinally beneficial that people see it as a helpful plant. And who doesn't like cheese? Cheese has been used as an offering for spirits since the ancient world. Everyone loves cheese. Even gods and goddesses love cheese. So that's the idea behind those. And these are little things that you can like slip in a tree hole. You can bury them underground. You can do whatever it is you normally do with your offerings. You can also like share them with your coven in ceremony. You can have them, you know, you can bury half, eat half, share it with the earth, literally. Like there's a lot that can be done with them. It's offering technology. So that takes the shape of your practice, but it's a recipe that I think is like cut and paste. Anyone can use this in any way that works for you, especially because we're at the time of the year where reconnecting with those spirits is going to be important.
I love the classic ones that, you know, that every spirit is going to be stoked, especially the apple. I think that that's so true in our experience. Amy wrote a beautiful ritual about an apple that was like core in me, just playing with that magic and in healing from a shitty experience. So I always remember the feeling of that apple and eating it and burying it. And it's like one of those moments where magic became so real and rooted healing from something. And I think
kitchen witchcraft is so much of that. It's where magic really becomes tangible, and you can do like physical healing and magical healing simultaneously. I mean, like, people will say that you can do that with Reiki and other stuff, but like, you can feel it happening in kitchen witchcraft. You can like trace it chemically in kitchen witchcraft, which is pretty neat. So yeah, that's one of the unique things about this discipline, is it can do both.
Yes. And we live so much inside that space of like the practical and the magical in one action. And that was kind of the thrust of the Apple spell, was this idea of like processing, I'm using scare quotes again, processing something and then letting it go. You know, we think of that as like events, traumas, what relationships. But when you eat something, that's exactly what you're doing. So this Apple spell was like a symbolic act of processing something with our bodies and then literally letting it go. I mean, I won't get into the gory details of how our bodies do that, but we do. We let go of the parts that we don't need, and our bodies keep the parts that we do need. And I think that that's just such a wonderful symbol of how we can go about our lives.
Yeah, and that's ancient magic, right? The macrocosm, microcosm thing, where the ritual is you playing out something that you want to happen in the macro. That's old time magic.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So Sarah, as a yogi, can you talk about this, like the relationship between yoga and kitchen witchcraft? Obviously the body is probably the meeting point there, but can you get into like how these two disciplines sort of came together for you?
Good question. Good question. The very first book I wrote was a yoga book. It was called Yoga for Witches, and there was just a kind of a tiny little section in it about kitchen witchcraft. And many years later, my publisher would be like, "Oh, hey, should we explore kitchen witchcraft a bit more?" And thus was the beginning of Kitchen Witch, that became this. You know, I thought it was just going to be a book of, you know, a few recipes and stuff, and then quite suddenly I was hit with this fact that, you know, there is a whole kind of history to magic in the kitchen that I just, you know, had not seen a book about. So kind of to go back and then me and Melissa did it like at the same time. We were like, bam, let's follow these lines. So that was awesome. That was a good, you know, beginning of the year when like both the books came out. It was awesome. I've digressed slightly. So going back to part of the philosophy of yoga, and it is a many branched path. You know, just a small part of it is kind of what you see on Instagram, which is, you know, lycra clad bodies doing something fancy on a beach, which is a great part of yoga, but you know, it's not all of it. But a lot of it is about kind of listening to the body and respecting the body. And there are other beautiful ancient Indian practices such as Ayurveda, and kind of seeing the body as a whole and looking at, you know, your energy and your spirit, and we are more than just our physical bodies, and how can we honor that in what we consume. So Ayurvedic medicine is one of the oldest ancient practices of medicine that we kind of still listen to today, but just in a kind of very day-to-day sense of kind of following the ideas of yoga with food, it's that idea of listening to your body, nourishing your body, and being kind to your body, which it seems like such a simple premise, but especially, you know, today, in today's world where it's, you know, intermittent fasting and get beach body ready and lose those pounds. Just the idea of being nourished, being fed, you know, it just feeds that hungry witch within us, you know. It's like we are furious and we are cranky when we are hungry. So let's just nourish and feed ourselves, and then maybe we can go out and be and take flight in whatever way that means for us. So it feels like a little tiny rebellion just to feed and fuel ourselves properly. So that's magic in itself. And I fear I haven't really answered the question. I've gone off on one a little bit there, but just eat food and fuck diets, and that's magic. So let's do that.
You know, I've got a question for you, Sarah, and I hope it's okay if I ask kind of a bitchy question.
Oh, ask me a bitchy
about
question.
You, It's about not about you at all.
A salty question, I believe, is how the Americans say it.
Yeah, that's kinder.
Something salty.
I'm a lot of Gemini placements here, so I unfortunately can't stop myself. But was any part of your book inspired by how bad the other kitchen witchcraft books are?
It's a good salty question.
Was any part of, because that was such an inspiration for me, and I wonder if that's the case for you, because I'm glad to see more depth given to this subject. There was a lot of, it was a famine out here of information on kitchen witchcraft before new authors started writing. And I wonder if you felt that frustration as well in your research.
It's a really good way of putting it, the famine of, I think what it was is that just, I started that idea of, right, okay, I'm going to write a book about kitchen witchcraft. Where the hell do I start? And just, I had this collection of books and I was like, they're kind of all the same. Like they were all,
suck.
I mean, all of them suck, but they were very much similar in the fact that they were following the Wiccan, specifically the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, which is fine, but it's a very, very specific wheel. And it was recipes, and there was nothing digging down into the roots of like, yeah, kitchen witches is quite a positive association. A little bit, maybe it has these kind of quite twee and cutesy connotations, you know, cinnamon cookies and frilly aprons and things, and you know, the little actual charm that kind of hangs in people's kitchens. So there was kind of, it was lovely that, oh, here is an archetype of the witch that isn't, you know, mean and cruel and ugly. But where did this come from? And then actually the joy was really diving deep into just a sumptuous history of food magic that runs back to, you know, our earliest feasting time. So it was an excellent opportunity, and it really pushed me into that. I can't write another recipe book, you know, that's just a recipe book, because it's been done a lot. So I think we were pushed into doing something more. And I think ultimately that was awesome. Otherwise, you know, so that's good.
Well, yeah. Follow-up question. I'm sorry. Did you have something to say?
No, I just wanted to say, like, the first kitchen witch, I'll use scare quotes again, the first kitchen witch book that I got, this was years before we started the Missing Witches project. I opened it up and it was like hot dog casserole, something which I'm not above, you know, using what you have and doing what you have. But I was like, hot dog casserole. And then a whole section of the book, I guess it just hadn't been bound properly, fell out and hit me in the foot. And it actually really hurt.
That was a strong warning.
Like, bad kitchen witch books, I was like, because I put it on the shelf and never opened it again. I was like, this book is clearly out to get me.
It added insult to injury.
Yeah, exactly. But it just popped into my head when you were like, bad kitchen witch books. I was like, oh, you know, mentally.
Well, I guess what I mean when I say
fist.
bad is like, when I say bad, I mean like overly simplistic, right? They do all kind of say the same thing, and none of them, there's no historicity provided, there's no root. Well, and so here's my follow-up question for you, Sarah, because this was definitely true for me, and I want to see if it's true for you. I'm just comparing our research process.
Cool.
When you were done with your research and when you were actually writing the book, did you find that kitchen witchcraft was something different than you thought it was?
Yes, absolutely. I started off writing the book with something completely different in my head, and about halfway through, I think I was just writing, and this happens with a lot of my books. I'm kind of writing, I'm halfway through, and then suddenly I'm like, oh shit, that's what this is all about. Like it is kind of revealed to me what this journey was all about, and it was that whole, you know, the hidden history of women, you know, the stories of the witches that were just kind of forgotten, and the massive undervaluing of those who nurture and feed. And so, yeah, absolutely. It, you know, came to be something completely different that I started off with. And, you know, just a few minor breakdowns when it was just like the weight of all that and the fact that it hadn't really been done before. I was just like, there's so much. How am I ever going to do this all justice? Like, how am I going to tell all these stories? Because they need to be told. And, you know, so I had my moments when I was just like, it's just too much. I can't believe the weight of this.
And it's because no one else has like really written about it from this perspective before. I was also like, am I doing it right? Like, is this what people want? Or should I just put the apron back on and do the cosplay, stir my tea, Wittershins kind of thing?
I think a lot of the books are like, this food folklore has really been dismissed for many years, and now academics are, finally taking it seriously. But exactly. Who are these people? Because I haven't found one. So when they say finally, it's like just now, like literally right now, it's becoming a thing. But someone's got to start somewhere. So we got in there and started the groove.
If you were planting seeds with future researchers in this field, imagine there are people who will listen to this who are all over the world. Some of them are like little mycelia, like not safe for them to be out where they are at all. There's a lot of people in our coven who have that experience. There are people, but who are like incredibly wise, incredibly educated in their way, ready to contribute to this great work that we are all a part of. What are the seeds you would plant? What are the questions you would be like, can you help us investigate this? Can you tell us about this from your perspective? Can you help us research this? Like, what are the questions that you were left with after writing these books? Go ahead, Melissa, to start.
Well, I'd be like, if there are any traditions of culinary magic in your family, in your religion, in whatever small sect you practice, put them out there in the world, please. Contact, someone needs to be researching this in a serious way and actually getting these specific spells down so that we can do more than say, witches for thousands of years have stirred cauldrons, because that sentence doesn't really have any information in it. You know what I mean? It's more useful to be like, in 154 BC, they used bread to curse the government. Here's the specific spell. That's the kind of stuff, that research is what I want more people to be doing. I don't know about you, Sarah, but it felt like I was just in there with like a pick, like just going through every grimoire being like, just mention food once, please. And they do, but they're just so hidden in the back and nobody talks about it at all. So I would like for other researchers to be assisting with this, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of other people doing this work. And it is so important because it's something that shows up in every culture where there's food, because it's something that shows up time and time again in history. It's weird that it's not taken seriously. But I think you said it yourself, like the image is frilly aprons and we're going to make biscuits. You know what I mean? Why would that be taken seriously by a male dominated world? When we think of magic, we think of ritual magic, which is so exciting. You're summoning spirits and you're doing all the real magic stuff. Who's usually doing that stuff? Who's writing those books? Men, rich men with money to publish. Not us. And it almost feels like the tools of kitchen witchcraft are too crude to be taken seriously, in a world that really just wants the spectral spirits and other, I don't know, it might seem a little less exciting on paper, but it's not. Like, I was reading a spell the other day from ancient Greece where you make a bread and you feed it to someone who lied to you. And if they did lie, they'll choke on it. Like, that's pretty cool, and there's not a lot of people looking at the guts of it like that. And so I know it seems like we're just making biscuits, right? And I think that when we are able to peel back the cottagecore motif that I think a lot of neo-paganism gave us, and we're able to actually look at a corpus of history of kitchen witchcraft, we're going to really see that knife as a magic wand more than anything else. You know what I mean? And we're going to see that this is one of the only places in history where we gave women weapons and didn't supervise them. The kitchen is where women have been armed, and the only place they've been allowed to be armed for thousands and thousands of years, and poor people and other folks who are dismissed in history, not just women. So I think that when we get more research, we're going to see the pointy end of kitchen witchcraft, which is what I want the world to see.
I love that your description of the ceremonial magic so much. That was so much our experience that drew us into doing this work, was that we were just like young, we were old, but we were baby witches. We were curious. We were trying to find this history, and we just kept finding these rich white dudes who had self-published and called themselves like the mother of witchcraft or whatever. We were like, what is happening? But then, I also kind of love it because of, again, this idea of hiding in plain sight, right? Like, go for it. Get your furry capes on and swing your scepters. Off you go. Just leave me and the girls and the queers to do our shit over here. Go ahead. Put
Isn't
on
that what they're always doing, swinging the scepter?
Go ahead.
Always what's going on?
Yeah. Attract who's attracted to that. Leave us be.
Yeah.
No question, just delight. Sarah, do you want to I don't remember the question.
Oh, just to totally second what Melissa said,
yes.
so beautifully. But yeah, the stories, the songs, you know, I spoke earlier about the Hymn to Ninkasi, which is this beautiful song that priestesses sung, but it was also kind of the recipe of the making the beer. And when I read that, I was like, oh, fantastic. I'll do a whole section on amazing kind of songs that women sung around food and things. And obviously I was completely deluded because they just didn't exist. So I was like, well, shit, there goes that amazing plan I had for that, you know, chapter, because, you know, they weren't written down. And actually, you know, the Hymn to Ninkasi was kind of an outlier, you know, joyful that it still exists. But so it, you know, is going to be much more asking the questions of families, of ancestors, of grandmothers, great-grandmothers, you know, people that work with the food and things to kind of uncover and draw out, because yeah, that these things weren't written down. So the work to kind of pull it out is going to be a big thing, but exciting. So yes, just basically seconding everything Melissa just said.
Well, and everyone I've found in the research kind of like innately knows a little kitchen witchcraft, right? I don't know if you found this, but when I was asking around, because I did need to ask around, I was like, help me, this research is hard. No one apparently ever wrote this down, and I'm the first person to go looking for it. So, which is not true, but it felt that way. And everyone I asked, like all the occult friends were like, oh, I know an alchemical candy recipe, or oh, did you know there's a hummus recipe in the Picatrix, or, you know, oh, and so there's this little hidden stuff everywhere. It's ferreted away. It's in everything, and everyone already knows about it, but no one is collating it and talking about it. Isn't that weird?
I suppose it's, in a way, it's very fitting, because it is, you know, it's drawn from these ancient oral histories where people didn't write these things down, but now we want to. So,
but even now, no one's talking about it. You know what I mean? Like, even if
when you ask them, they've got it. They're like, yeah, my grandmother used to make a mint tea, or, you know, she used to make me this specific recipe when I was feeling unwell. So everyone kind of knows it, but maybe you have to ask the right questions to kind of draw it out of people, or...
You know, yeah, because no one is contextualizing it as kitchen witchcraft or witchcraft at all. Everyone's like, oh, it's a folk charm. And is it just because of the mundanity of food? Is that really it? Like, because herbs are mundane, candles are mundane, but we don't seem to think of those as too mundane to be magical. For some reason, food is just on the other side of that line, where people just
eating soup is just too boring. So that's not
every day to be magical. And like, when you're a witch, nothing is mundane. First of all, when you claim the identity of witch, you relinquish the mundane. There is no mundane. There's only the magical world. Everything that exists that was mundane before now has the magical perspective overlaid it, because it's coming out of your eyeballs. So I don't know, like, it's just weird to me that magical people, even still in today's world, are still marginalizing kitchen witchcraft. We think of this as something of the past, where women are much more oppressed than they are and much more marginalized than they are. We're still doing that. We're still marginalizing kitchen witchcraft as mundane, as everyday, as the work of the home, which is not where magic lives. That needs to be in our ritual container, and, you know, whatever we think magic's supposed to be. Kitchen witchcraft kind of rebels against that all the time, right? It tells us magic isn't what you think it is. It's actually everywhere, all at once, constantly. Like, you know?
So well said.
I think it exists in a lot of places, in a lot of cultures, in a different language framing too, right? Where we're not going to call it magic. Like, in our book, we talk about, there's one of two traditional sake brewers in Japan that are left out of the hundreds, and they're doing it the same way for 500 years. And a core piece of the process is the song they sing to the fermentation as a part of keeping everyone. It's the recipe, but it's also gratitude. It's also singing to the microbes. It's also animism. It's also part of like every piece that is alive in that process. And it's not thought of as magic or witchcraft, but it is in an ancient animist tradition, which is so core to what we feel too, looking around, that nothing is mundane. Everything is alive, and everything is, we could call it magic. They might call it holy or something else, but what are those places where it's hiding?
Yeah, there's so much of our, I mean, from agriculture to cooking, everything, so much has been co-opted by capitalism, which I think has a lot to do with this sort of demeaning of DIY, and even all of as we go around the year, there are certain things that we have to have food-wise, like New Year's Eve is champagne, and Easter is a Cadbury cream egg, and Valentine's Day is a heart-shaped box of chocolates, and these are things that we buy. These aren't things that we make. And so I think that there's always that push to like just buy it. And witchcraft, again, is like the antithesis of just buy it. It's like the DIY-ist. So I mean, I know why, but I'm gonna ask anyway, like, why does capitalism demean so much of what we do in our homes, or devalue?
Do you want to take this one, Sarah, or me?
I could start off and then you can we'll see how we go. I'm trying to think now of, I had like a spare collection of fairy tales from the book that I was going to put into kind of a little kind of Christmas kind of thing, because a lot of them were kind of like about winter witches, and I thought, oh, that's damn cool. And it was lovely how these kind of stories kind of captured a little bit of the kind of enchantment, and again that idea of kind of drawing around the hearth fire and telling our stories, and how the magic of the season was nothing to do with something that you were buying, something that you were gifting to people. It was much more about coming home to the hearth fire, connecting to your family and your friends, and the art of storytelling, I guess, is kind of a remnant to that idea that there is more to these festivals, whichever ones it is that we are celebrating. There's more to them in terms of gratitude and celebration and abundance and joy than anything that we might be able to purchase at this time. So, but again, that's kind of, to many people, it's dismissed as sort of, oh, it's a bit rural, it's a bit kind of scrappy, it's, kind of this kind of rustic way of doing things, which is interesting because that makes it kind of sound lesser, when in fact it's like, well, maybe I value this festival in a way that's not about buying something particularly. So yes, that's all.
Love that. And that's completely true. Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about the writing from Sylvia Federici, and also Sarah Lyons is one of my colleagues here in New York. She also writes a lot about capitalism and witchcraft together. She put out Revolutionary Witchcraft a few years ago. I don't know if you guys read that one. It's so good. And she's got a new one coming out, which talks about this quite a bit, talks about the history of magic quite a bit. And both of those authors, in Caliban and the Witch from Sylvia and Sarah's books, talk about how the subjugation of women and the rise of capitalism go hand in hand. And also, particularly, the marginalization of the domestic sphere is a direct result of the origins of capitalism. So we don't have capitalism without the marginalization of the domestic, and the marginalization of any work that does not directly bring capital into the home. So when we talk about DIY and you making your own soap and you taking care of yourself, it might save you money, but it's not bringing capital in. And so it's not important. And so the work of women doesn't bring capital in. It just takes care of the house and keeps it running and is essential to its function, but it doesn't bring in capital. And so it's easy to marginalize. And that's been that way for hundreds of years, starting in Europe and unfortunately sweeping across the entire globe. So that's my idea of why. And so, like, especially now that witchcraft is kind of in not the mainstream, but like the B-list mainstream, like, Vogue is writing about witchcraft, New York Times is writing about witchcraft, but it hasn't really had like a day in the sun, And we now see like witchfluencers and stuff pop up everywhere, and even scam businesses trying to kind of capitalize on this. That's what I'm trying to get at. There's a lot of trying to capitalize on witchcraft now, even though it's something that resists capitalization. We now have people trying to sell us magic more than we ever have in the decades that I've been doing it. And so to make your own stuff, for most of human history, but especially right now, to be doing DIY, to be doing kitchen witchcraft, to be doing stuff where you're not paying money for someone else's expertise all the time. Like, I understand it's beneficial to take classes and to trust people who know more than you, but when you never trust yourself enough to make your own tools and to make your own decisions, being able to do that now is very revolutionary, I guess is what I'm trying to say, as revolutionary as it has been throughout history, because we're still dealing with capitalism. We're still dealing with the marginalization of the domestic. So it's important for us to be doing that now, even not as witches, but as anti-capitalists, you know?
Yes, I think that, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. It's 2022, you know. I personally grew up in the 80s where DIY was, I mean, you didn't really have a choice, you know. We didn't have Dollarama, didn't exist. You had to go to a specific craft store even to get the felt that you wanted to make your hand puppet or whatever. But now, click, it's literally 2 clicks, and in 2 days you can have anything you ever dreamed of arrive like wrapped in plastic at your door. So I think that in 2022, it's like almost like the witch's objective to like try and fail and make bad recipes. And like, it's exactly what you're talking about.
So many people try to shortcut that failure and just buy the thing so they never have to confront being bad at making it, even if it makes more sense for their life to make it themselves, even if they want to make it themselves, even if they want to try. Not doing that shortcuts all the feeling bad stuff. In our world, you don't have to feel negative emotions if you don't want to, right? You can always buy happiness somewhere else. So I don't know. I feel like that's also part of the witch archetype, right? That confrontation with Jung's idea of the shadow. I mean, there's no historical witchcraft shadow magic, right? But we have this now. And I feel like the witch lives in confrontation with the shadow or constant integration and reintegration with the shadow. So we need that stuff too. We need the negative side as well. Yeah.
I mean, yes to all of this. But that's some of the things I'm going to hold with me from this conversation, especially because I do keep our listeners in mind who've told us that they aren't in safe places where they can be out as witches. I think that this is some of the things that have really been like sparks for me from this conversation are about how magic happens even in the fucked up recipe. That magic happens even in the gathering of people, you know, that you can wear masks that are comfortable to you. You don't have to take on the word witch, but just in gathering your people, in feeding your people, in making the mistakes of like trying and failing, that those things are going to bring you closer, and building communities around DIY, building communities with men, with queer people, build your communities around trying to learn how to do stuff. That those are places I think where we can have very fertile magic without being out, and that I think change comes from that. Are there things that you can offer? Sometimes at the end of these conversations we ask, is there a ritual? Is there something you're doing in your life? Is there something that listeners can carry from you going forward from today, especially knowing they're listening at the equinox?
I'll give that one to you, Sarah. I have to think.
Oh, thanks. Give that one to me because
we can insert melodic pause here, but
yeah, let's insert a lot of pause.
So something to take away with us, I guess, for the kind of coming season.
Mm-hmm. Or if we could improvise a ritual between us, we can take it that way too. But if there's something that comes to mind.
Okay, I've got one. Oh no, Sarah, you go first.
No, go.
We have that brain synchronicity today. Okay, I've got one. I talk about this a little bit in the autumn equinox entry for my book, but I don't really go deep on it. I'm not going to go super deep on it today because everyone's practice is going to look different. I'll just tell you how I do it. To me, this is a really important time of the year to be making spirit pacts and to be reaffirming our spirit pacts. If you don't work with spirits, maybe we can talk about this as making pacts with the lamp. Maybe find something you do believe in, even if it's something like the moon. And even if you don't know what you mean by that belief, maybe you're very green like that and you're drawn to it, but not enough to really know why. That too is wisdom and information. Follow that. And what I would suggest as a ritual going forward through the lean season, so make a commitment maybe from the autumn equinox to the winter solstice to have a regular practice where you make offerings. That's it. It doesn't require more of you. Show up, say hello, and break bread. Share a meal with the moon, with the forest, with the gods that you actually know their names of, with your ancestors. Do it regularly, whether that's on a particular lunar phase, whether that's a particular day of the week, something like that, and commit to it. I find that regular practice helps you go deeper. And if we don't maintain the regularity and the schedule, we can't get as deep as we ordinarily would. So make a short-term commitment. I, as a Gemini, need a short-term commitment. So I relate to that, and see what that gives to your practice, what information you get out of that exchange, like what gnosis you receive through that. And that, even in the simplicity of it, is a kitchen witchcraft practice, because it's organized around the food as the modality for magic. The food is how you are communicating with the spirit. There might also be orational stuff, but the primary modality is through snacks. So that would be the ritual that I would give to people. I think that can really be assistive in reframing what you think kitchen witchcraft is, and should also get you somewhere with your magic.
Yes, I love this notion of breaking bread with the moon. I absolutely am going to do that, especially because we talk about all the time, like we talked about the autumn equinox. Like, you can believe whatever, there's a philosopher, maybe Ortega, who said that we don't choose our beliefs choose us. So we're leaving that unknown country open, so maybe we're not even choosing what we believe. Maybe we're being chosen, but we know that the moon exists.
Yes.
Regardless of what we believe or are forced to believe, we know that the moon exists. And so I love this. Like, even if you don't know what it means to you, like you said, like, that it exists.
Investigative. This could be the process where you find out.
Yeah. And for me, Sarah said recipes are stories. And I love that. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then adding the epilogue of the sharing. I know for me, like, my kitchen witchery, the last step in the spell is to, take it to my neighbor, or to share it, or even, my spouse, like, make this and then, lay a plate in front of my spouse. That's always like the ending of the spell for me. But I love expanding this outside of sharing with humanity. If you don't do ancestor magic, a lot of us leave offerings for ancestors, but we could even just like leave an apple for the bugs, or again, like, share bread with the moon. I love this notion, and I love the idea of expanding our stories, that recipes are stories. And we can keep that story. We can turn them into novels. They don't necessarily have to be poems, but they can be novels that we expand as we keep up with a practice. I love this notion. Sarah, do you have any? Did you say no?
No, I just said beautiful. Sorry, I said beautiful.
Sarah, do you have any? I heard no.
No.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. And yeah, just while we're kind of carrying on with that idea of things that money can't buy, and that kind of acceptance that everything you need is already within you, feel free, just, in just the simplest, of kind of what you might call a ritual, just to allow yourself to be nourished by nature, go out and walk amongst the trees, see the change of seasons, and let that be your wheel of the year. You don't have to call it anything. You don't have to call yourself anything. You don't have to call your path anything. You can just be amongst the trees. And I mean, you can be nourished by the air around you. You can be nourished by what you see. You can forage if you like, if you want to bring, nuts or safely identified mushrooms back with you. You can make that part of the practice. And that's just a beautiful way of it. Just being in nature, where the trees don't give a shit what you call yourself, or what you're calling the festival. They're just so you can kind of hang out with them and be like, okay, I can see, I can feel, that's magic, and it doesn't have to have a name, and I don't have to buy anything to be part of this. I can just be here. So nourished by nature, hang out with the trees, and then come and hang out at your half fire and warm up.
I love that so much. We've started identifying as many of the plants as we can in the woods around here, and have just been bowled over by how much is edible, how much is safe, how much is okay. Like, even the tiny bits of, like, almost every species of evergreen that's around you, the little ends you can take and chew. They're rich in vitamin C. They're weird, they're clunky, but there's so much love in that almost everything around you is safe for you. And if it's not, then it's like, what's to be learned in that? Like, learn about what the lesson is in that poison. It's not everything is fucking for you also. So that's okay too, you know. Those are lessons that are okay to learn from where you are.
And there's empowerment in that. Like, I can go out and I can nourish myself, and my ancestors way back when would have known this, and you know, how can I know it now? And that's pretty exciting in terms of just kind of connection and remembering and finding our way with it.
You know, I also really like this idea. So much of our nourishment through cooking comes through plants, right? Comes through the vegetables and fruits we get to eat and all the vitamins there. But I think that your idea of cultivating spirit relationships with the plants as being important to the kitchen witchcraft practice, or just to the magical practice in general, is, I think, super important. I think it's Alkistis Demench. I forget what book it was, but she wrote in one of her books that spirit relationships are a lot like interspecies relationships, in the way that, like, you learn to communicate with your cat or your dog, even though you don't speak the same language and you guys barely understand each other, and yet something is communicated. We can do that with other living creatures and other species, like plants as well. Something can be communicated through that relationship. And I think that those kinds of partnerships set us up well for understanding spirit relationships. It can be sort of like a nice gateway drug. You do the interspecies relationship with things you can see, and then the interspecies relationship with stuff you can't. And I love that, especially working with the plants in that way, as spirited individuals, as allies and co-conspirators with the witch, working towards similar kinds of magic. That perspective being important for not just kitchen witchcraft, but witchcraft in general. Love that.
Yeah. I want to take it to like a little bit political before we sign off, because there are so many people, especially over the past few years, we're really starting to consider food security. And I think that we are, in the modern day, witches aside, so alienated from nature that we don't even conceive of the forest as being a source of food. Can you talk about, besides foraging, like how we can use witchcraft to assure food security for not only ourselves, but for marginalized people who live in food deserts? Is it just a question of a conversation is a spell of protection, or is there something in the kitchen witch that can help us assess, track food security in the world that we live in?
I think part of that's going to come from the magical perspective that you're now looking at food through, right? When you start to work with food in a different way, you start to think about it in a different way. And other people's food insecurity might become personal for you through the work of, like, food as materia magica, as something that has a divine component, for lack of a better word, something, the definition that works for everybody, I hope. So maybe it's going to become an important part of your practice to make food offerings to your community. I'm talking about like community fridges. I've got a friend in Philly who part of her kitchen witchcraft practice is once a week, she makes a meal to donate. Maybe that's something that you take on personally. Maybe you become more invested in the growing of food in your city now that you want to make sure that ingredients are local and made ethically, made, not with chemicals and stuff like that, made healthy for the community. Maybe that's work that you become involved with. I guess what I'm trying to say is when you accept the mantle of kitchen witch specifically, food becomes something different for you. And I have found through that it's made food very personal to me, and that now those causes are things that I'm personally involved with. My political work with food security isn't necessarily part of my magical practice, like as in it doesn't have a magical face, but it comes from there. That's where its root originates. That's where my passion for these projects come from. Even though my answer to the problem isn't magical, my passion for it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just that idea of just holding all the food we have, in gratitude. It's a relatively recent thing to have just so much abundance of food. Like, that's relatively new in the kind of the grand scheme of things. And, things like food waste and just kind of understanding what it is we really need, as opposed to just all this stuff we can buy, is part of kind of, again, a part of remembering, I suppose. So to be more mindful about how lucky we are to have food, and to treat it as precious and sacred and not to be wasteful. And whether that means learning what to do with food scraps, or sharing with others, or, you know, using, you know, windfall apples to make something to share with your community. So it's that food is sacred, all food is sacred, you know, and just sharing the magic around. I can never summarize my thoughts very well, so it's like, yeah, so that,
no, you are,
that
though.
thing.
and like that idea of the sharing of the magic around as being part of the magical tech, there's historical precedence for that. I'm thinking about like the Michaelmas bread from the Carmina Cattolica, where the ritual isn't over when the bread is baked. The ritual is over after you give away more than half the loaves to the people in your community.
Yeah.
That's when it's over. That to me, like there's precedence for this. It's not like some wishy, again, it's this idea of it being cutesy and this idea of like, we're doing this nice thing, how good it is to connect with our food and to put warm food in our tummies. And I'm like, actually, this is old magic that keeps communities alive. This is not wishy-washy cutesy shit. This is important. This turns the wheel of society. And the fact that you don't see that means that capitalism and patriarchy live deep in your brain. And you need to speak to someone about that.
Speak to your local witch about that.
Yeah, we can remove the worms from your brain. That's what the knives are for. Sorry, no.
Yeah, go ahead, Kalika.
So, random question, really nothing to do with politics. I was just like thinking about the history of kitchen witchery in my own family, and just a real random aside. Anytime my mother was mad, her food tasted awful.
Ooh.
It was foul, like almost inedible anytime she was angry and she cooked.
I almost wonder if that was on purpose. She was like, you shitty kids and my rotten husband, here, eat this. But that's probably not what you were looking for, so I'm going to mute it.
But the same thing happens for me. I've noticed if I'm angry, my food is not as good as if I'm like go into the kitchen with a better attitude about cooking. Like if I go in there and I'm just like, my food tastes awful.
I mean, I'm not surprised. Like, if you're angry, you're not paying attention. Your mind is elsewhere, right? You're not cooking with intentionality. You're not thinking, will this taste good to people? You're like, I'm going to turn out something and these fuckers are going to eat it. And if they don't like it, they can cry.
Right.
And they will. They will. It's very untasty. But I feel like that's true. Like, mundane cooking requires a level of magical intentionality that the rest of mundane life does not require, right? So even before we get to magical stuff, when you're not able to be present it really is an act of love to create food for another person, to give life chemicals to another person. When you're not present for that, it's easy for that to be palpable, shall I say.
Yeah. And one of the first things my mom told me when I moved out of my house, I needed my own little kitchen witch, because my mom never called herself a kitchen witch. Like my mom was Catholic, so the word witch is horrible. But she had a little kitchen witch in her kitchen, and she told me it was to keep fires out of the kitchen. And she impressed on me. I had to have, that's one of the first things I needed to buy for my kitchen was a kitchen witch to protect from fires.
That's ancient Roman magic. That comes from the Feast of Fornicalia. Fornax was the goddess who's the personification of the oven. And if she was mad at you, she would literally burn your bread or burn your house down. She specifically was the one who made the oven stop making fires in the rest of the house. So the idea of the kitchen witch at the altar, specifically to control fire, that's Fornax.
Yep, I have mine. She's sitting
from anyone. That's so cool. I've never heard someone talk about it specifically for the fires. That's wild.
Yeah, I have mine sitting I have an old style hanging basket, and that's where mine is sitting, by my door of my kitchen.
Yeah. It's amazing that history kind of traveled all the way through to like in the 1960s and 70s, it was so popular in England to have these little, you know, poppets of witches to hang, and to stop your bread from burning, to stop you know, the pots from bubbling over, to stop fires. So it's that amazing thing of these kind of what we think of kind of modern charms and stories, and they're kind of how far these things go back is, you know, always fascinating.
Yeah.
And the one time I've never had a kitchen witch in my house was the one time I burnt a goose.
And I say, magic is real. It works.
You know, I just want to give a shout out to your mom, Kalika, who is a good Catholic woman who would never call herself a witch, but it made me think of the Ipsita Roy Chakravarti quote, every strong woman is a witch. And I love that there are all of these, even, you know, among our Catholic mothers, our Christian mothers, our variously, you know, prim and proper women in our lives, that there is a witch. There is a witch somewhere. It might be in the kitchen, maybe it's in the bedroom, maybe it's in the bathroom, maybe it's in her heart. But there is like a little witch in all of us, even those of us who would deny it for, you know, religious or political reasons. I love that story of your mom being so insistent, you know, despite being a good Catholic woman, that she is so insistent that you have a witch in your kitchen. Otherwise, your house is for sure going to burn down. I love that. I love that. And I think, you know, I'm so happy to have you two authors in this room together. We all are, because that's sort of the spectrum, right? Like, the Witch's Feast is like science and history and fact, and then, you know, the Kitchen Witch is like fable and storytelling. But both of you are on this spectrum where, you know, if you're red and blue, you're both very much bleeding into purple, and I love that. I love that even the kitchen can be this place of history and imagination and science and invention. Yeah, I'm just so happy, and we're so happy to have had you both in this room together to talk about all of these. How thrilling. And I hope you'll keep in touch with each other and keep this feast a cooking, shall we say.
Thank you so much for having me and for having me part of this discussion with Sarah. This has been a super stimulating conversation. Lots to chew on after this, for sure.
For sure. It's been a real honor. So thank you all.
So once again, let's start with Melissa, tell us the name of your book, also how our guests can find you. I know you teach classes. If you want to plug those, go.
Yeah, so if you're interested in my scholarship and learning from me, I do have some of my classes available as downloads on my Etsy, so you can actually get a lot of my kitchen witchcraft classes right from there, including the occult history of bread, which has that choking spell that I mentioned with the ancient Greece, don't lie to me spell. You can also find a lot of my recipes and my writing on my website, which is thewitchesfeast.com, just the title of my book. And if you want to follow along with what I'm doing and get class updates, you can follow me on Instagram. It's the only social media that I will tolerate anymore. And I am at Saint Jane. It's saint.jayne, which is my middle name. And you can find me there.
Awesome. So my book, Kitchen Witch, Food, Folklore and Fairy Tale, is available from all the usual online places that you buy books from. And you can get it direct from my publisher as well, Womancraft Publishing. They're very awesome. And it's a great website of just a beautiful array of books on the divine feminine, witches, and all such delights. Instagram is kind of my main platform too, and I'm there as at Yoga for Witches, which is my first book. So come and hang out with me on Instagram if you so wish. And that's it, I think.
I want to just send extra love to Lucy from Womancraft. What a brilliant thinker. We were so blown away by her vulnerability and insights in our conversation about neurodivergence and magic.
She is a constant and total inspiration, and
yeah,
just somewhere every time I'm writing a book and she's editing, I'm thinking, how has this happened? How has this amazing woman seen potential in the crap that I'm putting together, and how does she transform it into a book? She is a witch of words and a wise woman indeed. So we love you, Lucy.
Yeah, and I'm sure she would insert a great deal of love and awe for you as well. She doesn't work with people out of pity. She works with people out of
true. That is
serious
true.
love and awe. So
every time we have a meeting on Zoom, I just kind of sign off with like, "Thanks, Lucy. I love you."
Yeah,
I just
I love you.
Tell her I love her every time we have some sort of professional meeting. It's like, I love you very much.
Yeah. So let's raise a glass, listeners, wherever you are. Here's to breaking bread with the moon. Here's to crawling through the cauldron together. Here's to all the witches around us hiding in plain sight, and all the ways that we sporulate our ideas, send our mycelia into the ground, survive the lean times, and save the fucking world.
Yes, cheers.
Blessed fucking be. Happy equinox.
You must be a witch.
Join the amazing, surprising Missing Witches Coven at patreon.com/missingwitches.